The afternoon sun was starting to set as David walked down the busy street, his backpack slung over one shoulder after another long day at the community center. He worked there as a coordinator, helping kids with their homework and organizing activities. It wasn't the highest-paying job in the world, but it made him feel good knowing he was making a difference in young people's lives. As he passed by the large shopping mall downtown, something caught his eye. On one of the benches near the entrance, a little girl was sitting all alone. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, and she was crying softly into her hands. People were walking by constantly, shoppers carrying bags, business people talking on phones, teenagers laughing with friends. But nobody seemed to notice the scared little girl. David slowed his pace and looked around. Maybe her parents were nearby? Maybe she was just having a moment and would be fine. But as he watched for another minute, it became clear that she was truly alone. His heart went out to her. He knew what it felt like to be scared and lost even as an adult, and for a child it must be terrifying. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her more than she already was. When he was a few feet away, he crouched down to her level and spoke gently. "Hey there, are you okay?" The little girl looked up at him with tear-filled blue eyes. Her blonde hair was a bit messy, like she had been running around, and her cheeks were red from crying. She was wearing what looked like expensive clothes, a pretty pink dress and shiny black shoes that probably cost more than David made in a week. "I can't find my daddy," she said in a small voice that broke David's heart. "Oh no, that must be really scary," David said, keeping his voice calm and friendly. "My name is David. What's your name?" "I'm Lily," she said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "That's a beautiful name," David smiled. "Lily, how long have you been sitting here?" "I don't know," she sniffled. "A really long time. Daddy said he had to go to a meeting and he would come back to get me, but he never came back." David felt a wave of concern. What kind of parent leaves a young child alone at a busy mall? But he tried not to judge. Maybe there was an emergency, or maybe something had happened to delay her father. "Okay, Lily, don't worry. We're going to figure this out together," he said. "Do you remember where your daddy went for his meeting?" Lily scrunched up her face, thinking hard. He said something about a big building, with lots of windows, and he said people always want to talk to him there." That wasn't much to go on, but David nodded encouragingly. "That's good. Do you remember anything else? Maybe what your daddy's name is?" "His name is Daddy," Lily said seriously, which made David smile despite the situation. "Right. But what do other people call him? Like when someone calls your house, what name do they ask for?" Lily thought for a moment. "They usually say Mr. Wellington, I think." David made a mental note of that. Wellington wasn't the most common name, so maybe that would help. "And do you know where you live? What street or what part of town?" "We live in the big white house with the gates," Lily said. "And there's a fountain in the front yard with a fish that spits water." Again, not super specific, but David was getting the picture that this was a wealthy family. The expensive clothes, the gated house, the fountain, all signs that Lily's father was probably well off, which made it even stranger that he would leave his daughter alone. "Are you hungry, Lily?" David asked, noticing that it was getting close to dinner time. She nodded shyly. David reached into his backpack and pulled out a granola bar that he had been saving for his own snack. "Here, eat this. It'll make you feel better." Lily took the granola bar gratefully and ate it quickly. David could see that she had been hungry for a while. As she ate, he looked around again, hoping to see a frantic parent searching for their lost child. But the stream of people continued to walk by without paying them any attention. "Lily, do you have a phone number I could call? Maybe for your house or for your daddy?" She shook her head. "Daddy always says I'm too little for phone numbers, but I know we have lots of phones at home." "Okay, that's all right," David said patiently. He was starting to realize this might be more complicated than he had hoped. "Do you remember what kind of car your daddy drives?" "It's big and black and shiny," Lily said, "and sometimes Roberto drives it instead of Daddy." "Who's Roberto?" "He's our driver. He's really nice and he always has candy in his pocket. A personal driver. David was definitely dealing with a wealthy family here. But that raised even more questions. If they had a driver, why was Lily alone? Why hadn't anyone from the family come looking for her? The sun was getting lower in the sky, and David knew he needed to do something soon. A young child couldn't just sit on a bench all night. He made a decision. Listen, Lily, I think we should go look for your daddy together. Would that be okay with you? Lily's face brightened for the first time since he had met her. Really? You'll help me find him? Of course, David said, standing up and extending his hand to her. We're going to find your daddy, don't worry. She took his hand trustingly, and together they started walking away from the mall. David felt a mix of emotions. He was glad to be helping this scared little girl, but he was also nervous about the responsibility. He was a black man walking around with a white child who wasn't his own. He knew that some people might look at them strangely, or even suspiciously. But Lily needed help, and he couldn't just walk away. As they walked, Lily chattered away, seeming much happier now that she wasn't alone. She told him about her favorite toys, her pet cat named Whiskers, and how she was learning to play piano. David listened carefully, both because he genuinely enjoyed talking with her, and because she might accidentally give him a clue about where to find her father. David, she said as they walked down the sidewalk. Yeah? Thank you for helping me. Most people just walked by and didn't even look at me. David felt his heart squeeze. Well, that's not right. When someone needs help, especially a kid, people should stop and help. Are you a daddy? Lily asked. No, I don't have any kids of my own, David said. But I work with lots of kids at my job and I really like kids. You're really nice, Lily said simply. I think you would be a good daddy. David smiled at that. Thanks, Lily. That's very sweet of you to say. They continued walking through the downtown area, David looking carefully at every building and trying to figure out where a businessman might have meetings. The area was full of office buildings, hotels, and restaurants. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but David was determined. This little girl trusted him to help her, and he wasn't going to let her down. Whatever it took, he was going to reunite Lily with her father. David and Lily walked hand in hand down the busy street, looking at every building they passed. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows between the tall office towers. David kept checking his watch, knowing that as it got darker, finding Lily's father would become even more difficult. Do any of these buildings look familiar? David asked, pointing to a row of glass office towers that stretched up toward the sky. Lily squinted up at them, her small hand shading her eyes from the setting sun. Maybe, she said uncertainly. They all look kind of the same to me. David understood what she meant. The business district was full of similar-looking buildings, all glass and steel, all reaching high into the sky. To a young child, they probably all blended together. They stopped at the first building and David approached the security guard at the front desk. The man looked up from his newspaper with a bored expression. Excuse me, David said politely. I'm helping this little girl find her father. His name is Mr. Wellington, and she thinks he might have had a meeting here today. The security guard looked at David, then at Lily, then back at David. His expression changed slightly, becoming more cautious. I can't give out information about people in the building, he said curtly. Company policy. I understand, David said, trying to keep his voice friendly. But this little girl has been lost for hours. Maybe you could just check if anyone by that name signed in today? The guard shook his head. Sorry, can't help you. He went back to reading his newspaper, clearly dismissing them. As they walked away from the building, David felt frustrated but tried not to show it in front of Lily. He had a feeling that the guard's reluctance had more to do with seeing a black man with a white child than with any company policy. Don't worry, he told Lily. We'll find him. Let's try the next building. The second building had a friendlier receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. She listened to their story with concern. Oh my goodness, you poor thing, she said to Lily. Let me check our visitor log. She typed something into her computer and waited. I'm sorry, I don't see anyone by that name who signed in today. But maybe try the Sterling building down the street. That's where a lot of the big meetings happen. Thank you so much, David said gratefully. It felt good to meet someone who actually wanted to help. As they walked to the next building, Lily tugged on David's sleeve. I'm getting tired, she said, and my feet hurt. David looked down and noticed that her fancy shoes, while pretty, probably weren't very comfortable for walking long distances. Tell you what, he said, spotting a small park across the street. Let's ta. Okay, a little break over there. They sat down on a bench in the small downtown park. David pulled out his water bottle and shared it with Lily. She drank eagerly, and he realized she was probably dehydrated too. Lily, David said gently, can you tell me more about your daddy? What does he do for work? He goes to meetings, Lily said, swinging her legs from the bench. Lots and lots of meetings, and people are always calling him on his phone, and sometimes he has to go away on airplanes for work. What else do you remember about today? Did your daddy say anything about who he was meeting with? Lily thought hard, her face scrunched up in concentration. He said something about, important people. And he said he might be late, but Maria would pick me up if he couldn't come. Who's Maria? She takes care of me sometimes when Daddy is working, but she didn't come either. David felt another wave of concern. So there was supposed to be a backup plan, but that had failed too. Something was definitely not right here. Does your daddy usually leave you alone like this? David asked carefully. No, Lily said, shaking her head. Usually Maria or Roberto stays with me. Or sometimes we have other helpers. Daddy says I should never be alone. That made David feel a little better about Lily's father, but more worried about what might have happened. If this man was normally careful about his daughter's safety, then something unexpected must have occurred. As they sat in the park, David noticed how Lily looked around with curiosity. She seemed fascinated by the simple playground equipment and the normal families playing there. Do you come to parks like this often? David asked. Not really, Lily said. We have a big yard at home with swings and stuff. But this is nice too, it's different. A young mother pushed her toddler on a nearby swing and the child's laughter filled the air. Lily watched them with a wistful expression. That looks fun, she said quietly. Would you like to swing for a few minutes? David offered. We have a little time. Lily's face lit up. Really? Can I? Of course. David helped Lily onto one of the swings and gave her gentle pushes. For the first time since he'd met her, she was truly laughing and smiling. Other parents in the park smiled at them, probably thinking David was her father or uncle. If only they knew the real situation. After a few minutes, David knew they needed to keep searching. The sky was getting darker and he was starting to worry about what would happen if they couldn't find Lily's father before nightfall. Okay, sweetie, we should probably keep looking, he said. Lily nodded, but David could see she was getting tired. As they walked back toward the business district, she moved more slowly, and David had to adjust his pace to match hers. They tried 3 more buildings with no luck. At each stop, David encountered different reactions. Some people were helpful and sympathetic. Others seemed suspicious or dismissive. One security guard even asked David for identification and wanted to know his relationship to Lily. I'm just trying to help her find her father, David explained patiently. She's been lost for hours. Maybe you should call the police, the guard suggested, though his tone made it clear he was really saying that David should leave. David was starting to think that might not be a bad idea. As much as he wanted to help Lily himself, maybe the authorities would have better resources for finding her family. Are you hungry again? David asked Lily as they stood outside another office building. She nodded tiredly. David looked around and spotted a small diner on the corner. It wasn't fancy, but it looked clean and welcoming. Come on, let's get you some real food, he said. Inside the diner, they slid into a booth by the window. The waitress, a grandmother type with a warm smile, brought them menus and glasses of water. What sounds good to you? David asked Lily. Lily studied the menu seriously. What's a grilled cheese sandwich? David was surprised. "You've never had grilled cheese?" She shook her head. "We usually eat fancy food at home, with lots of forks and stuff." "Well, grilled cheese is one of the best foods ever invented," David said with a smile, "especially with tomato soup. Trust me on this one." When their food arrived, Lily's eyes got wide. She took a bite of the golden, crispy sandwich and her face broke into a huge grin. "This is really good," she said with her mouth full. "Right?" David laughed. Sometimes the simple things are the best. As they ate, Lily continued to share little details about her life. David was building a picture of a lonely little girl who lived in luxury but didn't have many normal experiences. She had tutors instead of going to regular school, and her playmates were usually the children of her father's business associates. "David," Lily said as she finished her soup, "what if we can't find my daddy?" David reached across the table and patted her hand gently. "We're going to find him, Lily. I promise you that. Even if I have to search every building in this city." Lily smiled at him with complete trust, and David felt the weight of that promise. This little girl was counting on him, and he couldn't let her down. After dinner, David and Lily walked back out into the evening air. The streetlights were starting to flicker on, and the business district was beginning to empty out as people headed home from work. David knew they were running out of time and options. "Lily, I think maybe we should call the police," David said gently as they sat on another bench outside the diner. "They might be able to help us find your daddy faster than we can on our own." Lily's eyes grew wide with worry. "Will I get in trouble? Daddy always says not to talk to strangers, but I talked to you." David's heart melted. "No, sweetie, you won't get in trouble. You did exactly the right thing by asking for help when you were scared. And the police are there to help kids like you." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, he explained the situation calmly and clearly. They agreed to send an officer to meet them at their current location. While they waited, Lily scooted closer to David on the bench. "David, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you stop to help me when all those other people just walked by?" David thought about how to answer that question. "Well, when I was your age, I sometimes felt scared and alone too. I remember how much it meant when someone was kind to me. I guess I just think that's what people should do for each other." "Were you lost too when you were little?" "Sometimes," David said carefully. "Not exactly like you are today, but there were times when I felt like I didn't know where I belonged or who would take care of me." Lily seemed to understand this in the way that children sometimes do, even when they don't have all the details. "I'm glad you found me today," she said simply. "Me too, kiddo." A police car pulled up to the curb and a female officer got out. She was young, maybe in her 30s, with a friendly face that immediately put Lily at ease. "Hi there," the officer said, crouching down to Lily's level. "I'm Officer Chen. I heard you're looking for your daddy." Lily nodded shyly, suddenly seeming much smaller now that an official was involved. Officer Chen turned to David. "And you found her?" "Yes. She was sitting alone outside the mall several hours ago," David explained. "I've been trying to help her find her father, but we haven't had any luck yet." The officer asked David for his identification, which he provided without hesitation. She also asked him to explain exactly how he had found Lily and what they had been doing since then. David could tell she was being thorough, which he appreciated, even though it made him a little nervous. "Lily," Officer Chen said, turning back to the little girl, "can you tell me your full name?" "Lily Rose Wellington," she said clearly. The officer wrote this down. "And do you know your address?" Lily shook her head. "I just know it's the big white house with the gates and the fountain." "How about a phone number?" Again, Lily shook her head. "Daddy says I'm too little to remember phone numbers." Officer Chen looked thoughtful. "Wellington. That name sounds familiar. Let me make a quick call." She walked a few steps away and spoke quietly into her radio. David couldn't hear what she was saying, but he noticed her posture change. She seemed more alert, more serious. When she came back, her whole demeanor had shifted. "I need to make a phone call," she said to David. Can you wait here with Lily for just a few minutes? David nodded and Officer Chen walked back to her patrol car. Through the window, David could see her having an animated conversation on her phone. Is everything okay? Lily asked, sensing the change in mood. I think so, David said, though he was starting to feel uneasy. The officer is just trying to help us find your daddy. When Officer Chen returned, she looked slightly overwhelmed. I've been in touch with my supervisor, she said. It turns out there's been a search going on for you, Lily. Your father reported you missing about 2 hours ago. Really? Lily perked up. Daddy was looking for me? Yes, and a lot of other people too. There's been quite a search effort. Officer Chen looked at David with new respect. You did a really good thing today, sir. This little girl's family has been very worried about her. David felt relieved but also curious. Where is her father now? He's at the police station. Actually, he's been coordinating with our department and with his own security team to try to find Lily. His own security team? David asked. Officer Chen nodded. Mr. Wellington is, well, he's a pretty prominent businessman in the city. When his daughter went missing, it became a high-priority case. David was starting to understand that Lily's family was more than just wealthy. They were influential, maybe even powerful. That explained why Officer Chen had seemed so surprised when she heard the name. Can we go see Daddy now? Lily asked. Hopefully. Absolutely, Officer Chen said. I'm going to drive you both to the station right now. As they rode in the back of the police car, Lily chattered excitedly about seeing her father again. David sat quietly, processing everything that had happened. He had started the day thinking he was just helping a lost kid, but it was turning into something much bigger than he had expected. David, Lily said, grabbing his hand, will you tell Daddy how nice you were to me? And how you bought me dinner? And pushed me on the swings? Sure, if he wants to hear about it, David said. He will, Lily said confidently. Daddy always wants to know about people who are nice to me. He says there aren't very many people like that. David found that comment both touching and sad. What kind of world did this little girl live in where kindness was so rare that it needed to be specially noted? At the police station, Officer Chen led them through a maze of corridors to a conference room. Wait here, she said. I'll go get your father, Lily. They sat in the sterile room for a few minutes, Lily swinging her legs from the chair and humming, to herself. David felt nervous for reasons he couldn't quite explain. Meeting Lily's father felt like a big moment, though he wasn't sure why. The door opened, and Officer Chen walked in followed by a man in an expensive suit. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair and tired eyes. But the moment he saw Lily, his whole face transformed. Lily, he exclaimed, rushing over to scoop her up in his arms. Oh, sweetheart, I was so worried about you. Daddy, Lily squealed, wrapping her arms around his neck. I missed you so much. I waited and waited, but you didn't come back. I know, baby, I'm so sorry, her father said, his voice thick with emotion. There was an emergency at work, and then when I came back to get you, you weren't there. I've been looking for you everywhere. David watched this reunion with mixed feelings. He was happy that Lily was safe with her father, but he also felt like an outsider in this emotional moment. After a long hug, Lily's father looked over at David. You must be the man who helped my daughter, he said, extending his hand. I'm Richard Wellington. I can't begin to thank you for what you've done. David stood up and shook the man's hand. I'm David Johnson. I'm just glad Lily is safe. Richard Wellington's grip was firm, and his eyes were intense as he studied David's face. Officer Chen told me you spent your entire evening helping Lily search for me, that you bought her food and took care of her. Anyone would have done the same thing, David said modestly. Richard shook his head. No, they wouldn't have. And that's what makes what you did so special. Richard Wellington held his daughter close for a long moment before setting her down gently. He kept one hand on her shoulder, as if he couldn't bear to let her go completely. David could see the relief in the man's eyes, but also something else, a deep exhaustion that went beyond just the stress of losing his child. Daddy, David is the best helper ever, Lily announced proudly. He bought me a grilled cheese sandwich, and it was delicious. And he pushed me on the swings at the park, and he never got mad at me even when I couldn't remember where you were." Richard's eyes filled with tears as he looked at David. "You have no idea what this means to me," he said quietly. "When I realized Lily was missing, I thought about all the terrible things that could happen to a little girl alone in the city." "I'm just glad she's safe," David replied. "She's a wonderful kid. You should be proud of her." "I am," Richard said, his voice catching slightly. "And I'm ashamed that I put her in that situation in the first place." Officer Chen had been standing quietly by the door, but now she stepped forward. "Mr. Wellington, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly happened today? How did Lily end up alone at the mall?" Richard ran his hand through his hair, looking tired and frustrated with himself. "I had an emergency board meeting at Sterling Tower. My usual nanny called in sick at the last minute, and my backup sitter was already committed to another family. I thought I could take Lily with me and leave her in the children's area at the mall for just an hour while I handled the crisis." He looked down at Lily with regret. "I told the mall security to keep an eye on her, and I promised I'd be right back. But the meeting ran much longer than expected. When I finally got back to the mall, she was gone. The security guard said he had stepped away for just a few minutes to handle another situation." David felt a mix of understanding and concern. He could see that Richard clearly loved his daughter, but the story revealed just how isolated and complicated their world was. "The meeting couldn't wait?" David asked gently. Richard's expression darkened. "Our company was facing a hostile takeover attempt. If I hadn't been there to handle the situation, hundreds of people could have lost their jobs, including many people with families of their own." He paused. "But you're right to question it. No business crisis should come before my daughter's safety." Officer Chen nodded. "Well, the important thing is that everyone is safe now. Mr. Wellington, you'll need to fill out some paperwork before you can take Lily home." "Of course," Richard said. He turned to David again. "I know you probably want to get home, but would you mind waiting just a few more minutes? I'd like to talk with you properly." "Before you go?" David nodded, though he wasn't sure what more there was to say. He sat back down while Richard went with Officer Chen to handle the paperwork. Lily climbed up onto the chair next to him. "Are you going to come visit us sometime?" she asked hopefully. "I don't know, sweetie," David said honestly. "Your daddy and I don't really know each other. But you're friends now, right? You helped me, so that makes you friends." David smiled at her simple logic. "I guess it does in a way." While they waited, Lily told David more about her life. She talked about her big house, her cat Whiskers, and how lonely she sometimes felt when her father was traveling for work. David listened, struck by how much this little girl craved normal human connection. "Do you have friends at school?" David asked. "I don't go to regular school," Lily explained. "I have tutors who come to the house. Daddy says it's safer that way, and I can learn faster. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be in a classroom with other kids." David's heart went out to her. He thought about all the kids he worked with at the community center. Kids who might not have Lily's material advantages, but who had the freedom to play and make friends and just be children. After about 20 minutes, Richard returned. His face looked grim, and David could tell something was bothering him. "Is everything okay?" David asked. Richard glanced at Lily, then back at David. "Can I speak with you privately for a moment?" They stepped out into the hallway, leaving Lily with Officer Chen. Richard looked around to make sure they were alone before speaking. "David, I need to be completely honest with you about something," he began. When Officer Chen called in Lily's name, it triggered a lot of attention. "My company, Wellington Industries, is one of the largest corporations in the state. We employ over 10,000 people and we're involved in everything from real estate to technology to government contracts." David nodded, starting to understand why Richard looked so serious. "What I'm trying to say is that my family lives under a microscope," Richard continued. "There are people who would love to find something to use against me or my company. And, unfortunately, that sometimes extends to my daughter." "I'm not sure I follow," David said. Richard took a deep breath. "What you did today was incredible, and I will be forever grateful. But I need you to understand that by tomorrow morning, this story might be all over the news. Prominent CEO's daughter rescued by stranger. That kind of thing. The media loves stories like this. David felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't thought about media attention at all. I don't want any publicity, he said quickly. I just helped a lost kid, that's all. I know that and I believe that, Richard said. But not everyone will see it that way. Some people will try to make this into something it's not. They might dig into your background, ask questions about your motives, maybe even suggest that you had something to do with Lily being lost in the first place. David's mouth fell open. That's crazy. Why would anyone think that? Richard looked uncomfortable. Because you're a black man who was found with a wealthy white child. Because we live in a world where some people's first instinct is suspicion rather than gratitude. Because there are people who would love to create a scandal around my family. The reality of what Richard was saying hit David like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on helping Lily that he hadn't thought about how others might perceive the situation. Now he realized why some of the security guards and receptionists had looked at him strangely throughout the evening. I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but to prepare you, Richard continued, and to offer you my full support if anyone tries to twist this story. I have lawyers, publicists, and security people who can help protect you if needed. David leaned against the wall, feeling overwhelmed. I just wanted to help a scared little girl, he said quietly. And you did, Richard said firmly. You did something heroic today, David. You showed kindness and courage when it would have been easier to just walk away. But I need you to understand that doing the right thing sometimes comes with complications. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, David looked up at Richard. What happens now? He asked. Richard met his eyes. Now I make sure that you're protected and that the real story gets told. And I hope that somehow, despite all the craziness that might come with my world, we can find a way to stay in touch. Because my daughter has clearly bonded with you, and frankly, I think you're exactly the kind of person I want in her life. David felt a warmth spread through his chest at those words. Despite everything, the complications, the potential media, attention, the vast differences in their backgrounds, maybe something good could come out of this day after all. 3 weeks had passed since that eventful evening at the police station. David was sitting in his small apartment, grading some homework assignments from the kids at the community center, when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and smiled when he saw Richard's name. Hello, Richard, David answered. Hi, David. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just some paperwork. What's going on? Well, I wanted to give you an update on the media situation first. My publicist managed to keep the story pretty quiet. There were only a couple of small articles in the local papers, and they focused on the positive angle, a good Samaritan helping a lost child. No one tried to twist it into anything negative. David felt a wave of relief. That's great news. I was worried about that. My team did a good job controlling the narrative, Richard said. But honestly, I think the bigger factor was that you genuinely didn't want any attention. The reporters could tell you weren't trying to get famous or make money from the story. That made it less interesting to them. David chuckled. Well, I'm glad my lack of ambition worked in my favor for once. Actually, that brings me to the real reason I'm calling, Richard said, his tone becoming more serious. I have a proposition for you, and I hope you'll hear me out before you say no. Okay, I'm listening. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation at the police station, about Lily's life and my life and how isolated we've become. I realize that in trying to protect my daughter from the dangers of my world, I've also protected her from a lot of the good things in life. David could hear the emotion in Richard's voice. What do you mean? She talks about you constantly, David. About the grilled cheese sandwich, about pushing her on the swings, about how you listened to her when she was scared. These are normal childhood experiences that she's barely had, and it made me realize how much I've failed her as a father. Richard, you haven't failed her, David said gently. You love her, and she knows that. You were dealing with an impossible, Situation. Maybe, but I want to do better. And I think you could help me with that. David felt curious but also cautious. How? I want to offer you a job, Richard said. Not as a nanny or a babysitter, but as something much more important. I want you to help me give Lily a more normal childhood, to be a positive male role model in her life, to help her experience the world outside of our bubble of wealth and security. David was quiet for a moment, processing what Richard was saying. What kind of job are you talking about exactly? I'm starting a new initiative through the Wellington Foundation, our family's charitable organization. It would be a program to help underprivileged kids in the city, but also to help privileged kids like Lily understand the real world better. You would design and run the program. You'd have a real budget, a staff, and the freedom to do things the way you think they should be done. David's mind was racing. And Lily would be part of this program? She would be one of the kids involved. Yes, but not the only one, and not getting special treatment. I want her to learn alongside other children, to understand how fortunate she is, and to develop real relationships with people from different backgrounds. This sounds amazing, Richard, but I have to ask, why me? You could hire someone with more experience, more education, more credentials. Richard was quiet for a moment before answering. Because in one evening, you did more for my daughter than all the expensive tutors and specialists I've hired over the years. You treated her like a normal kid who needed help, not like a precious object that needed to be protected from the world. And she responded to that in a way I've never seen before. David felt touched, but also overwhelmed. This is a huge decision. Richard, can I think about it? Of course, take all the time you need, but David. Yeah? Whatever you decide, I want you to know that you'll always be welcome in our family. Lily asks about you every day, and frankly, I've come to think of you as a friend too. After they hung up, David sat in his apartment for a long time, thinking. The offer was tempting, not just because of the money, though he had to admit the salary Richard had mentioned was more than he'd ever dreamed of making. It was the opportunity to make a real difference, to help kids on a scale he'd never imagined possible. But it was also scary. It would mean leaving the community center where he'd worked for years, leaving the kids he'd already committed to helping. It would mean entering Richard's world of wealth and influence, a world where he wasn't sure he belonged. The next morning, David made a decision. He called Richard back. I've been thinking about your offer, David said when Richard answered. And? I have a counter-proposal. What if we started smaller? What if Lily came to the community center once or twice a week to volunteer and participate in our programs? She could help with the younger kids, work on projects, just be a normal kid for a few hours at a time. Richard was quiet, considering this. You want her to come to your neighborhood? To the community center? I want her to see how other kids live, how they play, how they solve problems together. And I want those kids to meet her too, to see that wealthy people can be kind and caring. It could be good for everyone. What about security? What about her safety? We'll be careful, David said. But Richard, if you really want Lily to have a normal childhood, at some point you have to trust the world a little bit. Richard sighed. You're right, it's just hard for me to let go of that control. I understand, but maybe we can start small and see how it goes? Okay, Richard said finally. Let's try it. But I want to visit the center first, to meet your colleagues and see the setup. Of course. 2 days later, Richard arrived at the community center with Lily. David watched through the window as they got out of a modest sedan, not the fancy car with a driver that he'd expected. Richard was dressed casually in jeans and a simple shirt, and Lily was wearing play clothes instead of her usual fancy dresses. We came to see your work, Lily announced as soon as she saw David running over to give him a hug. David showed them around the center, introducing them to the other staff members and some of the kids who were there for after-school programs. Lily was initially shy, but within an hour she was playing games and helping younger children with their homework. Richard watched his daughter with amazement. She's like a different kid, he told David quietly. I haven't seen her this relaxed and happy in years. She just needed to be around other children, David said. She needed to feel normal. As the afternoon went on, David noticed Richard relaxing too. He started conversations with some of the other parents, asking questions about their lives and their children. He seemed genuinely interested in their stories, not just making polite conversation. When it was time to leave, Lily begged to stay longer. "Please, Daddy, just a little more time." "We'll come back next week," Richard promised. "If Mr. David doesn't mind having us." "We'd love to have you back," David said. "Both of you." As they prepared to leave, Richard pulled David aside. "That job offer is still open, you know. Maybe not exactly as I originally described it, but in some form. I think we could do a lot of good together." David smiled. "Let's see how the next few weeks go. But Richard, I think this is going to work out great." 6 months later, the Lily Wellington Community Outreach Program was in full swing. Lily spent 2 afternoons a week at the center, and several kids from the center had visited the Wellington estate for special events and educational programs. The local newspaper had written a beautiful story about the friendship between David and the Wellington family, focusing on how people from different backgrounds could come together to help children. David still worked at the community center, but now he also coordinated the outreach program with funding from the Wellington Foundation. Lily was thriving, having made real friends and developed a deep sense of empathy for others. Most importantly, Richard had learned to be present in his daughter's life in a way he never had before. He attended every program event, got to know the other children and families, and had found a sense of purpose beyond just making money. It all started with one man's decision to help a scared little girl on a bench. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything.